Chairman, I can confirm the meeting is now live.
Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Eastern Area Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Alan McCrow and I'm Chairman of the committee. The other members of the committee present this evening are Richard Somner, who is also the Vice Chairman, Jeremy Cottam, Paul Kander, Jeff Mays, Justin Pemberton, Clive Taylor, Vicky Poole and Ross McKinnon. The following officers are in attendance to advise and support the meeting. Simon Till, who's the planning team manager, Shaheen Kowser, who's our senior legal advisor, Thomas Radbourne, the clerk, and Stephen Chard, who's hosting the Zoom session this evening. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please can I ask everybody present in this chamber to make sure you switch on your microphone when invited to speak directly into them and to switch them off when finished. But I also ask you to please make sure you put your mobile phones to silent and have turned off the sound on your laptops. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route and please follow any instructions given by the officers. The assembly point is the car park of the Dalton pub. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from officers. And we will adjourn the meeting until such time as it's safe to proceed. When voting, only members present in the chamber can vote, and voting will be via a named vote. I'm doing a named vote to assist the officers this evening. Do members have any questions about the way the meeting is to proceed? No. Okay, thank you. The first item on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We have not received any apologies.
Thank you. Item 2, the minutes of the last meeting. I did notice an error in the minutes and a couple of typos, and I'd like to ask Simon Chard if he can advise us, please.
Certainly, Chairman. Yeah, so thank you, Chairman, for bringing these to our attention. So the amendments that are proposed and are acceptable from a clerk's point of view, at least, is on page 7 of the minutes. It's the bullet point above the debate section. So it begins Warren Davies applicant. The amendments to that is actually the individual's surname is Richard, so it's Warren Richard, and he's from Transforming Developments Limited, not from the Care Quality Commission. So that point is amended, and then in the final line, it talks about specialist transport from the transport is from the applicant, so Transforming Developments or the local authority. So that's the first amendment. The other two are simple sort of typographical errors. So page 10, the second bullet point under paragraph 30, middle of that paragraph, there's a sentence that begins, members were strongly to advise. It should clearly be members were advised to consider. And then finally, page 11, the final sentence on that page, it should say he had listened to concerns.
Thank you. Are those amendments acceptable to members? Do any other members have any corrections or omissions, please? Okay. In that case, could I have a vote, please, to approve the minutes? And as I said, it'll be by named vote. So when the officer reads out your name, would you say whether you're for or against, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Jeremy Cottam?
For.
Paul Kander?
Abstain.
Alan Macro?
For.
Jeff Mays?
For.
Justin Pemberton?
For.
Richard Somner?
For.
Ross McKinnon?
Abstain.
Vicky Poole?
For.
Clive Taylor?
For.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the minutes are approved. Thank you. Can we move on to item 3? Do we have any declarations of interest, please?
No. Just as a point of record, I used to live next door to.
You used to live next door.
I used to live next
Okay,
door, but I don't know the lady in question. So.
Okay, thank you. So it's really, clarification. Thank you very much. Yeah. Can we move on then to item 4.1, which is the only application we're discussing this evening, 24/00378/House 49 Abbey Gardens. And could I ask Simon Till to introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I should just share my screen. Thank you, Chairman. This application is for the creation of a raised patio, planters and paving areas in the rear garden of 49 Abbey. Sorry, Chairman. Right. Thank you, Chairman. I'll proceed. Thank you. This application is for creation of a raised patio, planters and paving areas in the rear garden of 49 Abbey Gardens, Upper Wolverhampton. The application has been brought to committee with an officer recommendation of approval due to receiving more than 10 letters of objection. Abbey Gardens is a relatively recent housing development outside of the settlement boundary and within the North Wessex Downs National Landscape, formerly AONB. Due to its residential character, officers consider the principle of residential development of the form proposed to be acceptable in this location. It's worthy of note that the dwellings in Abbey Gardens do not have permitted development rights for extensions and alterations due to forming the setting of the listed former school buildings in Dowie Abbey and to the plot size of the dwellings. I'll briefly run through some photography of the works which have already been completed. Members, with apology, these photographs were taken some time ago when the works were partially complete, and members who attended the site visit have seen that the paving and planters are now finished and that the ground is laid to grass. So this is a photograph of one adjacent boundary, which is alongside number 50 Abbey Gardens. And this is the other side alongside number 48 Abbey Gardens. This is a plan that shows sections of the works. And this plan shows the listed buildings highlighted and the application sites, which is identified with a black dot. Your officers don't consider that the proposed works have any impact on the setting of the listed buildings due to their comparatively minor scale and nature and the lack of direct visual connection to them. Members, objections to this application raise concerns in respect to the impact on neighbouring amenity due to the raised nature of the patio adjacent to the dwelling. It is understood that this has been constructed at approximately 60 centimetres above ground level to provide level access for the applicant who is reliant on a wheelchair for mobility from the rear of the house. Turning back to the photographs, while officers note that the patio does provide an elevated position over which incidental views over neighbouring gardens are possible, due to the location of the planters alongside the boundaries, which are now planted up, it is not considered that a harmful degree of overlooking of the rear private amenity areas of the neighbouring dwellings would be afforded. Number 49 already benefits from the projection of an orangery extension to the rear that effectively recesses both neighbouring properties from the works. Therefore, in your officer's view, the impact on neighbouring amenity is not sufficient to generate harm that would merit refusal of this application. Concerns have been raised regarding overlooking of the bridle way, which is to the rear of the garden. As a public location, your officer's advice is that it's hard to see how any objections on these grounds could be sustained. Turning to other matters raised in objection, flood risk has been raised. However, as members were able to note on site, the rear of the dwelling slopes down to grassed area within the application site and a further grassed permeable area outside of the gated rear access. Therefore, your officer's view is that the works would not result in any strategic drainage or flood risk matters that need to be addressed in this planning application, and that any drainage concerns that result from the works would fall to be considered a civil matter between the landowners concerned. Finally, objections note concern with the retrospective nature of the application and the works having already been completed. While that's always a regrettable situation, there's no relevant distinction in planning legislation between a retrospective application and one submitted before works are carried out. And therefore, this isn't considered to weigh within the planning balance. Members, in light of these considerations, your officer's recommendation is for approval subject to the conditions referring to the approved drawings and materials as set out in the agenda report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Could I now ask Dr. Diana Davis, who's a supporter, to come to the dais, to the rostrum, please? You have 5 minutes to speak. Would you like a warning when you get it towards the end? Yeah. And on the I can't think of the correct word. On the rostrum, you can see there's a button to press to enable the microphone. Thank you.
Okay.
You may start.
Thank you. Yes, good evening. I am Shirley's sister Diana, a retired Newbury GP, and have lived at Abbey Garden since 2006. I'm pleased that this application has gained the recommendation for approval by the planning officers and the recent support by email from our estate manager and Armco's chairman, John Jackson. I think Helena will read that out shortly. I understand why homeowners enjoy living in the Abbey Gardens surroundings, and I support all enhancements using the high quality materials and in keeping with the design of our lovely development. This year has been a very difficult one for Shirley, but her family, friends, neighbours and carers have been very happy to help in these sad and unfortunate circumstances. The relevant planning points have already been raised, and Shirley and Helena will go through these in their submission. I'm merely offering my support to Shirley today to help answer any questions that you might have for her to clarify matters. Shirley and her supporters thank the committee for taking the time to visit number 49 last week to see the garden for themselves and for their time giving this matter its due consideration. I do hope you will now feel able to support the recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Cotton.
Yes, thank you. Just to check, you wouldn't be considering going any further, like, for example, with a gazebo on top of this?
No.
No. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, so did I hand over to Helena?
Yes, please,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, good to call Helena Reid Hinchcliffe, who's speaking on behalf of Shirley Bradley, and Shirley Bradley, I presume, is the applicant.
Yep.
Thank you.
Shirley Bradley. Yeah.
You also have 5 minutes. Would you like a warning when you're getting towards the
I
end?
mean, if I'm going on, do let
So
me
it's
know.
1 minute, say?
1 minute would be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Obviously, I've got pre-prepared with what my mum would like me to say, so I'm just going to read it through. So I'm Shirley's daughter, Helena. Obviously, I'm speaking on Shirley's behalf. She suffers from degenerative physical issues, including difficulty speaking, but she does understand everything that's happening and what's going on with the issues today. Last year, after constructing their orangery, Shirley and her late husband, Gordon, employed a landscaping contractor to prepare a scheme which would be mindful of Shirley's physical limitations. After its agreement, the estate manager was made aware that it was to proceed and its practical issues in terms of materials and deliveries and so forth. At that stage, it was not realised that such landscaping works would need the approval of the residents' management company, Armco, or require planning permission. When that was realised, which was at an advanced stage of the hard landscaping works, Armco inspected the works to date and allowed these hard landscaping works to be completed, subject to the submission of a retrospective planning application, which was duly submitted by Shirley and Gordon's advisor, Richard New. Before a case officer was appointed, this application was handled by the planning enforcement officer, Fenella Woods. Around that time, Gordon unfortunately became seriously ill and never recovered, in a coma for several weeks before passing away on the 21st of April this year. In March, Richard New requested permission from Fenella that the soft landscaping works could go ahead, and on the 18th of March, Fenella responded accordingly. Hello, Richard. Application all received, reference 2400378 house, awaiting a case officer before it can move forward. I don't have a problem with any planting being done whilst we await the outcome. Thanks for checking. Armco was made aware of this development and of Gordon's serious health problems, which required the need for a full-time carer for Shirley. Care that had been previously provided by Gordon, who was obviously under significant pressure at the time, rather exacerbated by this issue. After Gordon's passing, the Armco chairman, John Jackson, visited Shirley to pass on his condolences and commented that he was very impressed by the quality of the landscaping works, of the materials used, and of the planting incorporated. This is borne out by a recent email request on the 29th of August from the estate manager, Craig Cumming, as follows. Hi, Shirley. Please forward on to the planning committee that myself, as estate manager, and John Jackson, as chairman of Armco, fully support the garden plan and have no objections. Throughout this process, Shirley has been somewhat disconcerted by the fact that most of the objections raised against this proposal have been made anonymously by parties unlikely to be directly affected, and some rather unnecessary, inaccurate, and untimely comments directed towards her late husband, Gordon. She is, however, heartened by the supportive named submissions in favour of this application and the recent recommendation for approval by the case officer on planning grounds. Shirley just wishes to peacefully enjoy her gardens with minimal impact on her neighbours. In any row of terraced properties, residents live in close proximity. However, her terrace, 48 to 50, fortunately benefits from very usable front and rear gardens, which do afford greater flexibility and privacy if Shirley and her neighbours are using the gardens at the same time. Her neighbours' children do make some noise, for example, playing ping pong in the garden, which some might find intrusive. But as a former teacher, Shirley is always pleased to hear children enjoying themselves and very tolerant of any such nuisance caused. The case officer has confirmed that the landscaping has been completed in accordance with planning policy and that on planning grounds, objections made are not sufficiently relevant in this case.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. I've only got a sentence left. Shirley has respected this rather lengthy process throughout, avoiding any confrontation, and does hope that your committee will agree with the case officer's recommendation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Could I express my own and the committee's condolences for your loss?
Thank you.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions, please? Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for clarity and based on planning matters, which is what we would need to focus on, at no point in the early stages of this have you or anybody that's been involved with it been advised by the estate management company that planning applications would be required on the basis that there are no permitted development rights in place?
No.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, got to call Councillor Chris Reid, who's the local ward member, please.
Thank you, Chair. And if you could give me a 1 minute warning. Sorry. First of all, I'm delighted to see that the resident is enjoying the amenity of the gardens, and it was lovely to see her for those that turned up for the review. However, I asked the councillors, as I am the local ward councillor, to consider the following. The development the councillors saw, for those that turned up, is closely associated with the former Dowie School in the parish of Woolhampton. In fact, the gatehouse and dominating building that you saw as you drove into the site is part of the last school at that site, Dowie School, from 1903 to 1999. The modern school in Woolhampton, Berkshire, was formed by the site's pre-existing St Mary's College merging with the school of the incoming Benedictine community that moved from Dowie in France in June 1903 as a result of Waldeck Rousseau's Law of Associations, 1901. Former pupils lobbied the Irish Parliamentary Party to raise the matter of the expulsion in Parliament. The merger produced a school of 109 boarders. Its long history in France and its monastic influence meant that Dowie, although an independent boarding school, had in large part escaped the influence of public school ethos that had developed in 19th century England. However, in 1920, Dowie was admitted to membership of the Headmasters' Conference. In the 1930s, David Matthew, the later apostolic delegate for Africa, congratulated the headmaster Ignatius Wright on the fact that no Catholic school has been so free from the influence of Arnold of Rugby as Dowie has been. Day pupils were admitted from the early 1960s, and by 1984 there was a record number of 333 pupils. The school became co-educational in 1993. After several years of financial difficulty, it closed in 1999. More on the surrounding environment and on the buildings, which is, I think, more personal, and I can see Councillor McKinnon getting rather agitated there. In 1786, the Earl of Fingal, the Squire of Woolhampton, sold his Woolhampton estate and moved to Ireland. His family had been recusant Roman Catholics and had maintained a chapel and chaplain at Woolhampton House, now Elstree School, just down the road from Dowie. On leaving the neighbourhood, he left his chaplain to the minister of local Roman Catholics and endowed him with 7 acres of land and some cottages. 3 of these cottages stood on the site of the entrance tower, and one of these, Woolhampton Lodge, the priest lived and had a chapel. The oldest part of the current building dates from around 1830. The main entrance and tower were constructed in 1888, and the Tudor Gothic style, the architect Frederick Walters. In 1829, Friar Stephen Dambreen was appointed to Woolhampton. He embarked on a building programme which included a chapel in the Gothic style, opened in 1833 to replace the chapel in Woolhampton Lodge, which itself was replaced by the current St Mary's Church in 1848, just down the road. In the early years at Woolhampton, the school was seen as an appendage to the monastery and was only with the foundation of a separate abbey church in the 1930s, creation of a distinctive school and monastic refectories in 1944. And that degree of separation emerged. The monastery was greatly expanded in the 1860s, with the building of a new monastery designed by Sir Frederick Gilbert. Haydock Hall, the study hall, was briefly converted into a film set for the shooting of the dormitory scenes in the 1990 film, 3 Men and a Little Lady. The former school buildings were also used as a location in the 2002 television film for Goodbye, Mr. Chips. After the closure of the school, the site was redeveloped by Bewley Homes. The theatre block, swimming pool, science laboratories, Ditcham House were demolished and replaced with the new buildings that you saw. The main school buildings were redeveloped as private housing apartments.
You have 1 minute remaining.
The gatehouse, hall and 3 blocks of buildings are all Grade 2 listed. So why am I telling you this very long story of the history? It's because there is a strong sense of history at Dowie, and the residents, on the whole, buy into this when they buy a property. And that's why I believe permitted development is suspended to allow the Residents' Association to discuss and have an opinion on how properties are altered. I thank you.
Are there any questions, please, for the local member?
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me move on then to questions for officers. Do we have any questions for the officers, please? Councillor Cotton.
Thank you. Just obviously, always in my top of my mind is flooding issues. I mean, I'm glad to see that there is runoff on the garden and then runoff behind there. From the site visit, if officers would confirm, I think there's actually a drain there as well. So that would that be adequate to remove any torrential rain that might fall on the grounds?
Thank you, Chairman. I believe that you're correct, Councillor Cotton, that there is a drain channel to the rear of the site. In respect of this matter, really planning would extend to the matter of strategic drainage issues and flood risk. So here we're not talking a very strategic drainage issue. We're talking quite a localised drainage issue on an area without existing drainage problems. So really drainage at that point becomes a civil matter between the landowners concerned rather than a planning matter to consider.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just, I think some of the objectors mentioned it, and it was only right to ask it in the meeting that there was put forward that there was this concern. I'm completely reassured. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. I remember you actually mentioned it at the site meeting. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. It goes back to the removal of the permitted developments and rights, and I'm fairly certain I recall this conversation coming up when the initial application was being discussed previously. I'm quite surprised that there wasn't any recognition of that need for planning application to start with. So my first question would be, would we and have we checked collectively that that informative would have been given out? Because as far as I'm concerned, it would have been clear when that area was being developed that that would be the case. And the follow-up on that is that, just to be clear for everybody's awareness, that any changes, Councillor Cotton quite rightly mentioned earlier on about gazebos or conservatories or anything else, any of those sorts of developments which many of us would take for granted as being allowed will require a planning application in that area on that development.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, as part of the conveyancing of properties, conveyancing solicitors are required to assemble the correct planning permissions in relation to properties. That is compiled into an information pack that is passed on to the buyer of the property. In this case, the removal of permitted development rights features within the original planning permission for redevelopment of the site into residential. So would have been within that information pack passed on to the prospective buyer at the time. In respect of the second question regarding removal of permitted development rights, the removal of permitted development rights applies to all extensions, outbuildings, alterations to the exterior of the properties, and therefore would cover development of a permanent nature outside of the property. Temporary structures are a different matter. Those planning can't apply control over unless they're sited in such a manner as to effectively constitute a permanent structure. But I can confirm that there is control in place for any additional structures.
Thank you, Mr. Till.
Thank you. Councillor Kanda.
A follow-on question to your statement. In terms of permitted developments and permanent structures, is a patio a permanent structure, or would that typically be a building such as the orangery, etc.?
Thank you, Councillor Kanda. That's actually an interesting question. The answer to that is that a patio has been taken into case law as constituting a raised platform in terms of interpreting permitted development rights. And the permitted development rights restrict raised platforms above 30 centimetres. So in respect of the works that have been undertaken, it's legitimate to consider those to be a development operation, and in this case also an engineering operation, because they involve the deposition of a considerable amount of soil adjacent to the property. So yes, the works themselves do constitute works that require planning permission.
Okay.
The point I was trying to get to is, I think the reason that permitted development, as in a lack of, wasn't raised is potentially because typically people don't assume a patio as being requiring permitted developments. And that the only issue here seems to be that some of the complainants have raised the fact that it's 60 rather than 30.
Thank you, Chairman. As a point of clarification, that the permitted development rights regarding the 30 centimetres don't apply here either, because all permitted development rights for extensions, alterations have been removed, and those would capture a 30 centimetre raised platform as well. So in this particular case, I can't speak to the history of the applicant with their knowledge prior to the works in terms of permitted development rights being removed. But as I have confirmed to Councillor Sumner, that information would have formed part of the purchaser's information pack at the time they were conveyancing for the property. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah. Are there any other questions, officers? Thank you. Can we move then into debate? Someone like to start the debate, please? Councillor
Why
Cotton.
not? Indeed. It's either me or Richard normally. I had some concerns. I mean, you know, raising floods, I know it's not a strategic thing, but I mean, a localised flooding, which could affect the neighbours, has to be in my a consideration for my judgment on this. Having said that, having visited the site, I can't see any real overlooking on the adjoining properties. I'm happy with the flooding. Maybe my Councillor Sumner can point some mirrors of my way, but I can't see a huge problem with this as it stands.
Thank you. Councillor Sumner.
Well, why not? Given an introduction like that, it'd be rude not to. I absolutely agree. I've looked at it. I've looked at it on Google because I wasn't able to come to the site visit. So I've looked at it on maps. I've looked at the area. I understand the history of the area. You'd have to be fairly naive not to understand the history of the area. But what was put into that area was a new development, and removal of permitted development rights would have been a key thing that we would have asked for had it not already been provided at that point. So it's in place, and it's in place rightly. I think what concerns me, as I was alluding to earlier, is that in the early conversations about this, permission has been given, asset approval, from people that I would have expected to have been advising residents accordingly. And that accordingly is, you need to get in touch with West Berkshire Council and you need to start talking about whether you need a planning application. That disappoints me. But for this application, it being retrospective, we can see the work that, which unusually we can see the work that had been started, and by all accounts now is completed and looking much better. At this stage, I'm quite happy to propose that we accept officer's recommendation, Chairman.
Thank you. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Costa.
It would be equally churlish of me not to second that. Thank you.
Do any other members wish to speak in the debate? Okay, thank you. So we'll move to the vote then, which is officer's recommendation to approve to give conditional permission and on the application, which is a retrospective one for a new patio and garden works, 49 Happy Gardens. So could I now ask our legal representative to do a named vote, please? So she'll read out each member's name and please indicate whether you wish to vote for, against or abstain. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Jeremy Cottam.
For.
Paul Kander.
For.
Alan Macro.
For.
Jeff Mays.
For.
Justin Pemberton.
For.
Richard Sumner.
For.
Ross McKinnon.
For.
Vicky Poole. For. Clive Taylor.
Thank you. So that motion is passed and the application has been given conditional planning permission. So thank you very much. that is the completion of the business for this evening, so I will now close the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.